Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 59th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I'd like to discuss limits, and limitlessness of certain models and ideologies, magic, and action, that is, how you operationalize certain ideas or ideologies. So, I had exchanges with some people over email, and watched a certain number of videos, and there's certain things that I wanted to discuss. So first of all, as I've already mentioned, you are forced to set limitations or rules. You could even say maybe rules, can even be ideologies for experimenting infinity. You have to set those, otherwise you'd be lost. If you have no rules, no ideologies, then the next frame of reality that you'd likely experience, the next instant that you're going to experience, there is no preference for what you should be experiencing, so you're basically lost in infinity. You don't have any continuity into your of your experience. Of course, nobody can get rid of the rules and ideologies and limits that they set upon themselves because they're mostly internalized and hard rooted. You call them maybe root beliefs, which is why you don't see, at least in our reality, every day, daily, you don't see anyone flying around or picking up cars with their bare hands, because there are certain rooted beliefs that are so deeply ingrained that nobody can, or it's very, very difficult to actually get rid of them. And if you do get rid of them, you might simply disconnect from this reality. And so these root beliefs is basically like your BIOS on your motherboard, or like some fundamental shift in your operating system. If everybody is on Linux and you suddenly jump to an experimental operating system that has nothing to do with it, then what it would appear from this reality is that you'd basically die or disappear, because you'd simply completely disconnect the root beliefs which sort of roots you, hence root beliefs, to this common reality that we are experiencing right now. So we have to do with limits, but then comes the choice of the issue of too wide limitations and too narrow. And that's two things that I'm struggling with my own vision and what I've been explaining through all the videos. If you've been following my videos, is that either my limitations are too wide. That's when I'm sort of exploring the nature of infinity, the nature of nothingness, the nature of God, the absolute, vibrations, some like some overarching principles, which attach you to nothing, basically, where everything is possible, and at the same time nothing is possible, and it's just you cannot really derive any kind of meaning for reality other than just saying, okay, you have to find a meaning of your own, but then you're kind of left to your own devices. And then too narrow limits, which is sometimes, if I'm always speaking about this outside, or this inside outside relationship, the holon structure, comparing, our own reality to outside to what we experience within. That is, for instance, our own bodies, the way they work, and the way that basically what we believe about us inside is reproduced outside, like the fact that, like, for instance, something that's narrow is like the nervous system is our internet. And it's not that they're wrong necessarily, but it's still an oversimplification of the complexity of reality, because every time you jump to another level of complexity in the universe, it's impossible to completely understand the outside from just looking at the inside. It's like trying to understand how a human body works from looking at how a cell works, because the harmony that's found inside is then a sort of an inspiration for, or a template for reproducing the harmony of the body on the outside. But the cell has an extremely rudimentary energy input output system, like intake of energy and output, like, like receiving new energy and then getting rid of uh, trash or feces or whatever. And if you compare its own energy input output system to our digestive system, it's just impossible to understand our digestive system by solely looking at how a cell works. You can um, you can draw inspiration from the harmony and the general principles of balance that is found within the cell, but it the inspiration shouldn't limit you and your imagination as to what it should actually look like on the outside. And so, right now, for instance, we're discussing chips in our brain. We're discussing wireless internet with either satellites or 5G. And who is to tell whether that is actually a good way of implementing a more harmonious nervous system at our level or not? Who is to say? And perhaps the only thing that we can use to guide us is to look at our own beliefs about ourselves. And so, since about I just give a random number, since like over 90% of humanity sees itself as the intelligent part of the body is here, the brain, and these cells are basically just dumb cells, stupid, and they obey the commands of the elite cells, which are in the brain, then it's no wonder that we replicate the same kind of structure on the outside. That is, we create an elite, which is, you could say, like the World Economic Forum, for instance, and coupled with which these elites that couple their belief of um, how more intelligent than the rest of humanity they are to AI, artificial intelligence, and that's the new kind of, they think they represent the brain. And then, of course, since our own beliefs about ourselves is this structure, then they try to replicate it at their level, because obviously if that's what we believe about ourselves, we're bound to manifest the same kind of idea on the outside. They believe they should control the population, or the peasants, basically the stupid people that don't know how to create harmony, unless they are kind of forced into a forced coherence from some kind of elite via the internet, via this wires of nervous system which commands the stupid cells. And so, because that's the belief we hold about ourselves, then chances are we're not heading into the a very harmonious kind of manifestation, or of this higher complexity of what we have inside. But nevertheless, it's very difficult to find the right balance between too wide limitations, which are not operational, and where you're lost in infinity, and too narrow limitations, which, if you think you've sort of understood everything about reality, and how what you've understood from how you work on the inside should manifest outside, um, there needs to be some kind of balance between the two, and understanding, like leaving some kind of space here in the narrowness of your or understanding for learning new things, or recognize that you may not understand everything fully. And that's brings me to the magic element. So um, it's kind of this idea of surrendering. surrender to something higher. So, the Christian people saying surrender to Christ, for instance. And I like this idea of Christ because the image I had basically is that Christ is not an individual. It is Christ consciousness is the consciousness of the collective of the entire humanity once we become harmonious, and manifest this kind of global consciousness. That is Christ consciousness. And it's just wondering how our cells experience being part of our body. Do they actually, these individual cells, do they actually understand? First, they need to understand like 100% what it is that the human body is and how it functions and everything, and how the digestive system works, how everything works, before they say, okay, now that I understand everything, now I know what to do. And that is completely false, of course. It's completely crazy to think that way. The cell will never have a correct or accurate representation of the functioning of the body from its little perspective. All that it can do is to surrender to an intelligence or something that is above it, an intuition that is above it. And I think in the previous videos I said that basically you have two, like the human beings is basically midway between animal intuition and Christ consciousness. And right now we're kind of in the middle, where the rationalization of everything like morality, ethics, religions even, were all ways of transcending some of the base or animal instincts, which are not necessarily bad, but we're not animals anymore. We cannot act on impulses, and mixing instinct and survival instinct with the complexity of our world is very, very precarious. And so, for instance, for animals, instinct and survival are used accurately and well at their level. It's why when there is a volcanic eruption imminent, the animals flee the scene, while humans stupidly still stare at their instruments, and they're wondering, well, nothing's happening, nothing shows up on our instruments, so we shouldn't do anything. So that's when you're disconnected from your survival instincts. But when you use your survival instincts in your human relationships, your complex human relationships, and you view everything as under a survival lens, and who eats whom, who is dominating whom, then you get into this pedophilia, satanist groups like that just are basically it's almost like if they were cannibalizing the energy of children, and eating, like if they were predators, basically, in a very like dangerous world, and they needed to survive, and they needed to feed off of the weak in order to survive, because they're scared of everything. And the same, for people that feel like they're under threat of survival in their personal relationships with their spouses or with their friends, and they suddenly get violent. That is what happens when you haven't managed to sort of correctly integrate your instincts, your survival animal instincts, and understand that it's only for your physical protection, and that you're not threatened if you lose a debate or you lose face in an exchange with someone, and your ideas are not validated. And then if you're stuck at the rational stage, though, then you can get lost in all of this blah blah, and you don't have any higher meaning anymore. You don't seek any higher meaning, and the universe is just a stupid, meaningless machine. And then you have the Christ intuition, which is something that we will never, neither me or I believe, at least anyone, will be ever able to model accurately. But you can tune into it. And prayer is a sort of a mechanism for setting the rational aside for a time and recognize that there's something higher, and setting your intention for tuning into that higher intelligence willingly in order to guide you and make decisions, not forfeiting your rationality, because your rationality is a like a jump circuit, like a sort of a safeguard or something, including your animal instincts as well, in order to understand, in order to make sure that you don't tune in to a higher intuition, um, um, which has bad intentions. Like if of course, if there are higher positive kind of consciousnesses, then there are also negative ones in that higher plane. Just like, for instance, one of our cells can tune into the intelligence of our bodies, but there are plenty of other beings around it that are intelligent also, and that they could mislead them in behaving in a way that is not in the interest of the body. I'm thinking of parasites, I'm thinking of viruses, bacteria, I'm thinking of, mosquitoes, all of it, like, I don't know, anything that basically might be a predator or a threat to the body. And so too, um, the rational and the animal instincts are sort of safeguards or jump circuits in order to make sure that if you receive this intuition, but somehow you have your gut feeling that is saying this is dangerous, don't do it, it's going to put your life at stake, or your rational brain says this is completely crazy, it just goes completely, it's completely out of whack, then they should still be a sort of a safeguard in order not to blindly trust anything until you're completely sure that you're tuned into the right intuition and the right consciousness, higher consciousness or higher being. And with experience, gradually you'll be able to more and more set the rationality aside, integrate this animal survival instinct, and use it in a way to really just filter these messages and act in your higher in the higher interest of yourself and of course of the whole body. And I gave the example of that person that did a cartwheel in the middle of the store because it saved somebody else's life, and that's sort of an intuition that they've heard, which was kind of silly, but it went perhaps against the rational mind, because there's no rational reason why you should do a cartwheel, but it didn't go against the instinct survival. And because that person was attuned to this Christ consciousness or the higher being, then they had no problem in doing that. And what I mean by magic and surrender is that magic is leaving that space in this narrow view, in this which the limitations that might be too narrow in how you view the world, like for instance my own model of seeing things, the whole on philosophy, all kinds of things about how the universe works that I've been presenting, they are limitations if you take them as the only truth, and then you leave no space for being surprised or this magic kind of element of something magical happening. And it is placing, I'm also aware of this, that I'm almost placing myself as a cell that kind of knows what rules the body should how the body works and what rules should apply to the cells behaving to one another. And that's just, it's just not true. It's not possible. What is useful though is it's still one step in this rationality, which just makes you confident to leave the mental and the intellectual and what you believe aside a bit, and more confidence in tuning into something greater and having a greater chance of tuning into the right thing. Because if you have the sort of bad intentions and a model which is too dualistic, for instance, or where there's still this battle between good and evil and it's too judgmental or whatever, then the chances that you're going to tune in to the right consciousness, is not, well, it's less likely, let's say. And the last thing I wanted to say is action. And here I'll say that this is something that's been blocking me, is that if you're too much in this sort of intellectualization of how things work, then it's like if you were staying in the state of a stem cell. Like, oh, I can be anything. And then you don't do anything. Actually, you just think. You're just completely thinking everything over, and you're too much in your brain, too much in your thoughts, not enough in reality in your life. And so you're dreaming your life, and you're not living your life. That's something I've been experiencing, and I had a hard time with. It's like, for instance, I'd be with my kids, but I would be in my head. I would not be in the present moment. I would not be fully immersed in the activity that they're doing, and I'd be starting to think about the universe and everything that's happening to us and the higher meaning and everything. But I mean, you can really, it can be a trap basically, and you can be in this dreamy world, but not do anything specific with it. And so then it comes the idea of, okay, you have the thought, then you have the words, which is what I'm doing basically. I'm first thinking plenty of things, then I'm doing YouTube videos. But then if action doesn't follow at some point, then what's the point really? And that's the point where I'm now, is that ultimately all of these videos, all of these um, videos about trying to figure out how reality works, what's the model of reality, and all that, if it doesn't support some form of action at some point, then you're basically staying a stem cell, and it's not necessarily better than someone that is just acting, without even thinking about the model of the universe and just following his gut instinct. There has to come a time where you sort of operationalize the ideas or the models that you've made out for yourself about your beliefs about how reality works. And it's difficult sometimes. And there's also this gap between theory and practice in many spiritual teachers. And that's something that's also very delicate. That the way that you live your life is completely disconnected from what you actually preach. And you have many spiritual teachers, for instance, which have said some things that are really, really great and instructive, and they have touched upon some kind of truth, but then they're caught in some like sexual assault scandals, and rape and whatever. And it's not that it invalidates everything that they've said. It's just that there's a complete disconnect between theory and practice. And I don't. That's not how I want to live my life. And ultimately, I think that what makes Christ or the Buddha or other spiritual teachers so potent and important is that they've managed to fuse these two. Is that they really embodied the truths that they preached through their actions. Um, and so that's the idea also. And you have the example of, for instance, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which is a well-known French philosopher and thinker who has written beautiful essays about education and how we should educate children. And then he put all of his children at the orphanage because he didn't want to take care of themselves, and they were just this is too much work. And so you see, and then the irony is that his ideas were actually really good, but the way he lived his life, he didn't even bother to put them in practice, either because he was scared that this gap between theory and practice would invalidate his ideas, and that by trying his children would somehow prove him wrong, and he didn't want that to happen, and so he just stayed in this kind of theoretical, idealized vision of how education should work, and never confront it with reality. And so there are many dangers of staying in this theoretical kind of sphere. and never actually confront your ideas to reality. And so that's also a step that is now awaiting me, because of course I now have a lot of ideas of, how the internet should work, how the financial system should work, based on the theory or the new ideology, the new way of viewing reality that I have. But now I have to confront it with practice and see if it's the right time or not. And the same happened basically to Tesla, who was a brilliant mind and had plenty of great ideas, but it was not necessarily the right time for his ideas to pop into existence and become mainstream, because spreading the idea of free energy in the 1950s, given the level of consciousness of humanity, we would have self-destructed and be buried under a ton of waste for a long time already, because we would have not used that free energy responsibly at all. And so that's the thing, is that at some point you have to confront your theory to practice, and you also have to use this too narrow view and leave a gap open in that narrowness, and use that the new kind of way of viewing reality, or new kind of ideology, as this springboard to connect to something higher, a higher intuition, and practice surrender to that, and let that guide you as well. Not stick with an internal compass which is only constructed in the mental sphere or the intellectual sphere, because that's also leaving aside your emotions, your gut instinct. And the idea is to become an integral being, a whole being, where you integrate the animal, the rational, and the post trans-rational or Christ consciousness in one. So I hope this video was interesting, and talk to you another time. Thank you very much.